The Croquet Player by H.G. Wells. Part 1. The Croquet Player introduces himself. I have been talking to two very queer individuals, and they've produced a peculiar disturbance of my mind. It is hardly an exaggeration to say that they have infected me and distressed me with some very strange and unpleasant ideas. I want to set down what it is they have said to me, in the first place for my own sake, so as to clear up my thoughts about it. What they told me was fantastic and unreasonable, but I shall feel surer about that if I set it down in writing. Moreover, I want to get my story into a shape that will enable one or two sympathetic readers to reassure me about the purely imaginative quality of what these two men had to say. It is a sort of ghost story they unfolded, but it is not an ordinary ghost story. It is much more realistic and haunting and disturbing than any ordinary ghost story. It is not a story of a haunted house or a haunted churchyard or anything so limited. The ghost they told me about was something much larger than that, a haunting of a whole countryside, something that began as an uneasiness and grew into a fear and became, by slow degrees, a spreading presence. And still it grew in size, in power, in intensity, until it became a continual overshadowing dread. I do not like this ghost that grows and spreads, even though it does so only in the mind. But I had better begin at the beginning, and tell you about this story as far as I can, and the manner in which it came to me. But first I'd better give a few particulars about myself. Of course, I would rather I did not, but I doubt if you will realize my position without it. I am probably one of the best croquet players alive, and that I am not a bit ashamed of saying. I am also a first-rate archer. One is neither of these things without a considerable amount of discipline and balance in one's make-up. Many people I know find me a trifle effeminate and ridiculous because I make croquet my game. They say as much behind my back, and at times they betray it to my face, and I admit there have been moments when I've been inclined to agree with them. But on the other hand, quite a lot of people seem to like me. Everybody calls me Georgie in an affectionate manner, and on the whole I'm inclined to like myself. It takes all sorts to make a world, and I see no sense in pretending to be the human norm when one is not. Regarded from a certain angle, I am, no doubt, a soft. But all the same, I can keep my head and temper at croquet and make a wooden ball perform like a trained animal. Even at tennis I can make some of the fiercer sort extremely cross and silly. And I can do sleight-of-hand tricks, for which you certainly need nerve and complete self-possession, as well as most professionals. As a matter of fact, a lot of these tremendous sporting people, record breakers, gamblers, and so on, are much more akin to me than they like to think. There is a lot of sham in their pretension to hairiness and virility. At heart, they are as tame as I am. They have chosen to be boxed up in games. I suppose cricket and hockey and so on are more gladiatorial than my sort of sport. Aviation and motoring more lethal, and gambling more vexatious. But I do not see there is any greater reality in what they do than in what I do. Risk is not reality. They are players just as I am a player. They are enclosed with me in the same pleasant round of harmless and fruitless activities. I admit I have had an exceptionally uneventful life. I missed the experience of the Great War by a couple of years, and my life has always been an extremely sheltered and comfortable one. I was brought up by my paternal aunt, Miss Frobisher, the Miss Frobisher of the Barton Chapel case and the Woman's World Humanity movement, and it is only slowly that I've come to realize that my upbringing was, if I may be paradoxical, unusually banal. I have led a life largely of negatives and avoidances. I have been trained to keep calm and civil, and not react excitedly to surprises, and above all, to regard only ordinary, decent, everyday things seriously. My aunt took me over at the age of 3 when my parents divorced, and since then she's never let go of me. She's a woman with what, to be frank, one might call a natural hostility to sexual facts, and my parents' misbehaviour, Those were the days when the papers published full reports of divorce cases, and some of the details of the affair shocked her extremely. When I went to school at Harton, she took a house close by and entered me as a day boy, and she did practically the same thing while I was at Keble. Possibly I am naturally just a little inclined to be what the Americans call a sissy, and this tendency has been favoured by these circumstances. I have soft hands and an ineffective will. I prefer not to make important decisions. My aunt has trained me to be her constant associate, and with displays and declarations on all possible occasions of an immense maternal passion for me, she has, I know it clearly, made me self-indulgent and dependent. Yet I do not blame her very much or resent it very much. It's how we two have been made. She has always been rich and free to do as she liked, not only with herself but with others, and I have always felt well off and secure. Our lives have been easy so far. Like most well-born, well-off people, we have taken inferiors for granted, servants for granted, and the general good behaviour of the world towards us. I suppose there are still hundreds of thousands of people in the world, as sure of all the material best of life as we are, and taking it in the same matter-of-course fashion. What shall we do, we ask? Where shall we go? Nobody compels us. We are the floating cream of humanity. We have a house in Upper Beamish Street, a modest little place in Hampshire, and we move about a lot. My aunt, as many people know, is a very temperamental woman. I do not mean temperamental in any unpleasant sense. And sometimes we are keen as mustard on this woman's world humanity movement, though I have never clearly understood what it's all about. Travelling all over the world for it, so far, that is, as there are bathrooms en suite, upon which my aunt insists. Making contacts, usually until there's a difficulty over the committee election or something of that sort, and my aunt gets disgusted, and then for a year or so we drop woman's world humanity and go around wiping up the lawns with croquet champions or winning tassels with our archery. We are both quite extraordinarily good at the longbow, and my aunt has been painted as Diana by Wilmerdings. But croquet is our especial gift. If we did not shrink from the publicity and vulgarity of it, we could certainly be champions. We also play a pretty decent tennis game, and our golf might easily be worse, but the popular criticism of tennis has been carried to such high levels that we do not care to be seen playing, and golf we find mixes us up with all sorts of people. Sometimes we just recuperate. Lately we've been recuperating at Nupe, after a rather discouraging conference of the Woman's World Humanity movement at Chicago. The less said about those American delegates the better, but my aunt was fully equal to them. That, I think, is a quite sufficient explanation of myself and my atmosphere. The 2 club lawns at Les Nupe were excellent, and we found an admirable secretary-typist who dealt with my aunt's very extensive correspondence about the movement, and particularly with her libel case against Mrs. Glyco Harriman, taking it all down in shorthand, typing it in the afternoon, and bringing it in for revision after tea. There were 1 or 2 sets of nice-ish people with whom a little light conversation was possible without entanglement. Croquet an hour before lunch, and perhaps in the afternoon again, and dinner at 8. We never play bridge until after dinner. It is our inflexible rule. So that I had a certain amount of time upon my hands, while she wrote what would be, in the case of anyone without her provocation, extremely abusive as well as sarcastic letters, which I devoted chiefly to a morning's walk up the hill to the Perona Springs, where I took the waters, rather for fun than with any idea of a cure, and then sat in a state of wholesome idleness on the terrace of the Sauce Hotel, removing the inky taste by appropriately chosen refreshment. My aunt is inclined to a non-alcoholic attitude, but of late years I found the unobtrusive exercise of my private judgment in such matters not only permissible, but better for both of us. I mean, I'm a more cheerful companion. I think all that gets me fairly well, and now, with your permission, I will put myself into the background, so to speak, or frame, perhaps is better, and tell you about the first of these 2 queer men I met on the Perona Terrace.